Holidays. The vast majority of cultures around the world and throughout recorded history have had them in some form. To many, they are fundamental to the yearly cycle. In many Western countries, for example, it's difficult to imagine December passing by without anyone noticing Christmas. Christmas is simply something we do, something we've always done, and, presumably, something we always will do. But what if I told you that even Christmas itself was almost forgotten in countries like America and Britain? Yes, that's correct. Though Christmas dates to at least the 4th century AD, the holiday celebration started to fade in popularity in the 17th century. Not many people celebrated Christmas in the US or British Empire in the 18th century. We have the Victorians to thank for rescuing it in the 19th century. Alas, not every holiday was so lucky. Even some which were, not so very long ago, perhaps as popular as Christmas, are today forgotten, obscure, not even getting an honorable mention on the vast majority of calendars. One such holiday quietly passes each September 29th. It's called Michaelmas. In this video, we're going to talk about what Michaelmas was, why it was important, and why it may have disappeared. So let's get to it. How old art thou, Francis? Oh, let me see. About next Michaelmas I shall be. These lines are from Shakespeare's Henry IV. In it, the characters reference Michaelmas. Shakespeare doesn't say much about it, but he doesn't have to. Though Francis doesn't finish, he's using it as a simple reference point for the date of his birth, because everyone of his age knew what and when Michaelmas was. The same way we might say, oh, he'll be 40 around Christmas. Though the name is pronounced Michael in English, the correct pronunciation of the holiday is Michaelmas, for Michael's Mass, a bit like Christmas rather than Christ Mass. So, who is Michael, or Michael? This refers to an important figure in Christian, and more broadly Abrahamic belief. Saint Michael the Archangel. Though not frequently mentioned in scripture, Saint Michael the Archangel's roles are many. He is primarily known as the angel who defeated Satan in the war in heaven. According to the book of Revelation, this war began when Satan believed himself able to challenge God, and, taking the form of a serpent, set out to do so alongside his followers. However, Michael and his angels were there to challenge them. They defeated Satan and his followers, and cast them out from heaven and onto the earth. It is said that the battle cry of Michael and his army was, "Who is like God?" In Hebrew, this is translated as Mikael. It is a rhetorical question posed to Satan, the answer being that none could be. Michael has an important place in many Christian denominations. He is regarded as a warrior and protector, and the chief executor of God's will. Naturally, he has become the patron saint of many looking to such a figure, such as warriors and police officers. He is also regarded as the defender of the church and is said to guard souls from Satan on the hour of death. In some Christian denominations, saints are venerated and are even prayed to because they are believed to be closer to God and have more direct communication with Him. But while their deeds and services are celebrated, they themselves are not worshipped, which is an important distinction for understanding this holiday. In the Catholic, Anglican, and Lutheran churches, Michaelmas is Saint Michael's feast day. The Eastern Orthodox Church has an equivalent in November. A feast day refers to a day dedicated to a given saint on the liturgical or church calendar. It doesn't refer to a day on which to eat a large meal, although as we'll see, that was something that took place on Michaelmas. The holiday appears to have its origins in the very early Middle Ages, when a basilica in Rome was dedicated to St. Michael on September 30th. Celebration occurred the evening before, and thus the date of September 29th came to be dedicated to him. For several reasons, including the popularity of the figure, Michaelmas gained quite a bit of importance throughout medieval Christendom, especially in Britain, Ireland, Scandinavia, the Baltic, and much of Central Europe in particular. It became a holy day of obligation, that is to say, a day on which Christians were expected to attend Mass and abstain from unnecessary work. basically a day treated like a Sunday regardless of when it fell. Religious processions were sometimes held, and pilgrimages were sometimes made to holy sites associated with St. Michael. Furthermore, like many holidays of autumn, Michaelmas's placement in late September made it ideally situated to become a harvest celebration. In some countries, this led to Michaelmas becoming what was called a quarter day. Outside of their religious significance, quarter days were days which had a lot of worldly importance. As you might expect, there were 4 quarter days throughout the year, each placed roughly around the solstices and equinoxes. In England, Wales, and Ireland, but not Scotland. Alongside Michaelmas, these were Lady Day, March 25th, also called Annunciation Day, which actually marked the beginning of the year there until 1752, Midsummer, also called St. John the Baptist's Day, June 24th, and Christmas, December 25th. These holidays were celebrated in Scotland, they just weren't the Scottish quarter days. Anyway, in places like medieval and early modern England, quarter days were dates on which many things, typically things involving business, law, education, etc., met a deadline or commenced. For example, things like rent would be due on these days, leases would begin or end, other debts were expected to be paid, laws were sometimes enacted, and land was exchanged. People would seek employment for or be released from a job. Political terms and university terms would sometimes begin and end around the quarter days as well. Michaelmas was also, in good years, a time of festivity. The exact activities varied across time and place, but at its core, it probably was not very unlike something like Easter, Christmas, or Thanksgiving. Families, friends, and communities would come together for quality time, games, feasting, fairs and parades, plays, and general merriment. So with all this in mind, you can imagine what Michaelmas might have been like. Late September was, and is, a time in which autumn really begins to show itself in many parts of the northern hemisphere. It's when the mood of the world really begins to shift. The skies cloud, the days become noticeably shorter, the air cools, every living creature, from the smallest of animals to the tallest of trees, reacts accordingly, and begins to behave differently to prepare itself for what's to come. Likewise, you and your community would have been looking towards the coming hardships as well, and getting your affairs in order before the coming of the season. If you had had a prosperous year, this would have been a time to celebrate and give thanks to God. If the year had been unfruitful, then this would be a time to look even more closely to God and His servants for protection, although hardships doubtlessly awaited regardless of the quality of the year. At the center of a Michaelmas feast in Britain, Ireland, and Germany, one could expect to find roast goose. Eating a goose on Michaelmas is said to bring good fortune. There was a saying which goes, "Eat a goose on Michaelmas Day, want not for money all the year." Another food strongly associated with Michaelmas are blackberries. There is actually a legend in British and Irish folklore which maintains that Old Michaelmas Day, or September 29th on the Julian calendar, which is October 11th on the calendar we use today, the Gregorian, is the last day to pick blackberries. The legend holds that when Satan was cast out of heaven, he landed on a blackberry bush. In his rage, he destroyed the fruit, scorching and spitting on the berries. As a result, it's held that one ought not eat blackberries after this date. Whether you believe the legend or not, blackberries really aren't ideally picked after this date anyway. In Ireland and northern Scotland in particular, special cakes called Michaelmas bannocks, also called a strawn, made of things like a mix of rye, barley, oats, fruits, honey, and sheep's milk, were also made and consumed. Michaelmas bannocks were traditionally to be made by the eldest daughter of the family, and marked with a cross. Special bannocks were sometimes made in honor of the dead, blessed at Mass, and given to the poor in their name. Silver coins were sometimes hidden in these bannocks for children to find. It was considered bad luck if the cake broke before eating. Because Michaelmas fell in a time of changing seasons, people developed folkloric methods of predicting the future weather on this date. In Britain and Ireland, it was said that, "If ducks do slide at Michaelmas, at Christmas they will swim." If ducks do swim at Michaelmas, at Christmas they will slide. In other words, clear weather on Michaelmas was a sign of a harsh winter, and vice versa. As far as decorations and symbols are concerned, the most prominent is the aster, also called a Michaelmas daisy. Michaelmas daisies, which bloom in the late summer and early fall, tend to be purple or pink. Children would sometimes make chains of them to wear. The Michaelmas daisies, among dead weeds, bloom for St. Michael's valorous deeds, and seems the last of the flowers that stood till the feast of St. Simon and St. Jude. Other colors associated with the holiday are blue and white, colors related to St. Michael. In the town of Kidderminster, England, a fascinating tradition developed around Michaelmas. On the Monday after Michaelmas at 12 p.m., the old town constable would step down. The new one would take office around 1 p.m. This led to an hour in between in which there was technically no constable, which the citizens referred to as lawless hour. I didn't find any records of anyone trying to use this hour to commit any major crimes. It of course wasn't actually lawless, but it seems there was traditionally a massive food fight in this hour in which people threw fruits and vegetables at each other. This practice died down in the Victorian era. Did this holiday make its way to places like the British colonies in the Americas? Yes, but it doesn't seem to have been celebrated to quite the same extent. I found all kinds of documents from the Founding Fathers especially talking about Michaelmas before and immediately after the Revolution, but it's almost exclusively referred to as a term day for legal, financial, and educational matters, which is what you would expect from this particular group. For example, John Quincy Adams wrote to his mother Abigail a few times talking about his kids being on Michaelmas break from school. George Washington paid fees over the years prior to the Revolution that were listed as due by Michaelmas. The first United States Congress actually adjourned on Michaelmas, etc. It does seem that the holiday tradition was brought over, but it didn't quite take root by the time holidays started becoming more popular in America in the late 19th century. However, Michaelmas seems to have been well remembered in Britain and Ireland into the early 20th century. As popular as Michaelmas was, one day, its popularity began to decline. Why exactly this happened is a bit of a mystery. Understanding where, when, and why these holidays and their traditions begin is not very straightforward. Understanding their disappearance can be just as difficult. Perhaps we can turn to the history of comparative holidays like Christmas to answer this question. For various reasons, including the commonplace debauchery and its connections to the traditional Catholic and Anglican order, pre-modern Christmas, as I mentioned, was disliked by the Puritans and some other reformist Protestant groups of Britain and the United States. This led to Christmas suffering short-term bans. The bans didn't work, but for decades, centuries even, the popularity of Christmas declined significantly compared to days past. Michaelmas was almost certainly affected by this great cultural debate as well. Similar things occurred outside of Britain. In the 1770s, in many Scandinavian and German countries, there were actually official measures taken to regulate and reduce the number of holidays being celebrated. Michaelmas is generally found on the list of holidays of these reforms in these countries, along with holidays like Epiphany, Candlemas, Pentecost, St. John's, and All Saints' Day. This decision was motivated partly by the concerns of Protestant reformers, but also seems to have had backing from the proponents of secularization and Enlightenment philosophy, and the governments of these countries looking to reduce the number of days off. Industrialism may have also played a role. As people moved from agricultural environments to urban environments more and more, the traditions and customs associated with an agricultural lifestyle, like harvest festivals, which Michaelmas partly was, became increasingly forgotten. Furthermore, the use of quarter days declined in general as well. But then why wasn't Michaelmas revived and or modernized? Again, several potential reasons come to mind. One is that it's possible that the best chance of a kind of Michaelmas revival would have actually come from the United States. It is the case that, despite their much older European origins, some holidays, like Halloween or St. Patrick's Day, probably only have global fame because of American influence. In America, though, Halloween, and especially Thanksgiving, may have taken the place of Michaelmas, preventing interest in its revival. Thanksgiving and Michaelmas do, after all, have a lot in common. These are hypotheses, and they're by no means the only possibilities. But what is known factually is that Michaelmas did not die out everywhere. It is alive and well in certain areas across Europe and even abroad. For example, in the city of Augsburg, Germany, the Tura Michaela Fest, or Tower of Michael Festival, is still going on after 500 years. Every hour on the Perlock clock tower, a Saint Michael figure strikes Satan with a lance each time the bell tolls. Another example is the custom of Goose Day in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. Michaelmas also still carries religious significance in the aforementioned churches. However, in the 18th century, it lost its status as a holy day of obligation. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, I invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning, namely my videos on Christmas and Halloween, and to subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. To support the channel, there is a link in the description to my Patreon. A special thanks to our current supporters listed here. By the way, I also have a science channel much like this called Lucinox, which you may enjoy as well. Thank you for watching.